Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I wanted to go ahead and give a quick update on Set 6 Amethyst Steel Hyper Aggro builds. I've been seeing this pop up a few times and seeing some people have some really good success with this in testing. I've seen this deck beat mid-range decks and control decks like Sapphire Ruby, which was quite surprising, and I do think that this deck is well poised to be most likely, at least in the beginning, the most meta-relevant hyper aggro deck in the format, but we'll see how things play out. It definitely got a lot of upgrades, and we're going to cover those in this video here. This will only be a deck profile vid, but again, once I can finally arrange something with my friend, hopefully I'll be able to test a couple of decks, and this being one of them if you're interested in seeing some gameplay. Anyways, jumping straight in, we are looking at the cost curve here. We max out at 4 cost characters or 4 cost cards. We play a lot of 1-drops, a lot of 2-drops, and then we slowly just get reduced in the amount of cards we play as we go higher up on the curve. And this is a good aggro strategy because you can play multiple interactions in a turn, like multiple 1-drops, etc., as you move forward into the mid game. But you'll be closing out the game fairly quickly for the most part, or that's what you'll be aiming to do. But this deck is different than Amber. You're not looking to close it out as soon as possible. This deck has a little bit more of a stabilizing factor, which we'll discuss as we cover the cards here. We only play 11 uninkable cards and 49 inkables. Again, my ratios can be played with. You can opt to play 4 or 3 of a certain card, up to you. I play 57 characters and only 3 actions. Okay, the color spread doesn't really matter, but yeah, 43 amethyst and 17 steel. So taking a look here at the 1-drop package, we play a total of 18 1-drop characters. The Chernobog Followers and the Magic Brooms are cards that you choose when they trigger their abilities to replace themselves, so that's good. You quest with them. If they're threatened to be taken out, you can banish them, right? Play a character for the Broom or quest and banish with the Chernobog Followers, and they will replace themselves, making sure that you keep up with your card advantage. You can continue to play ready threats, and you're not running out of gas very quickly. Maleficent continues to be, the only 1-drop 2-quester that this deck will play. And you really only want to play her when you have the ability to protect her, or she'll be safe. So for example, if you play her on 1, your opponent doesn't develop a character on 1 or any way to threaten this, you can leave her to quest, leave her exerted, that she's probably safe. But if your opponent does develop a character on 1, you know that, okay, if I'm going to quest with this Maleficent, I likely need a way to bounce her back to my hand with like a Mim Snake follow-up play on 2, right? So that continues to be the same trend here, nothing new there. And the other 1-drop is Mickey Mouse, the Food Fight Defender, just because this card can be a little bit of a challenge to out, and in combination with something like Merlin Crab, this card can help you clear out some of the threats to your aggro board as well, having the resist +1. Your opponent needs a character with 3 toughness or 2 characters with 3 strength, or 2 characters with 2 or more strength in order to throw into this to take it out, and this card can likely just get you a couple of lore if your opponent can't answer it. And plus, into aggro mirror matches, this card can really be an MVP as well, because the 1 strength on the opposing aggro characters won't do anything to this Mickey Mouse, and you can clear opposing aggro boards. The card that you really want to talk about, though, is the new edition of Diablo, Obedient Raven from AZURITE. This is a 1-cost inkable 0/1 character with the ability Fly My Pet. When this character is banished, you may draw a card. So this ability is the exact same as the Cusco from Rise of the Floodborn. When it's banished, draw a card. Again, similar to Chernobog Followers and Magic Broom, this card will replace itself. The nice thing is you don't need to proc the ability like with the Broom and the Chernobog Followers. You just continue to quest with this until your opponent decides, I'm going to decide to take it out. It will replace itself, hopefully, and get you 1 or more lore in the process, and then you just continue to play ready threats. So you can see on your 1-drop curve, you have a lot of cards that are allowing you to replace themselves while generating you a very small amount of lore. So a little bit of a different mindset compared to the Amber aggro decks that you've seen. Moving on to the 2-drop slot here, we're playing 3 Cusco. Again, you can opt to play 4. I've always been a fan of this card because, again, it's just draw. You play it, you feel safe, you know that I'm going to quest for 1, 2, 3, however many until my opponent decides to deal with it. And this card can sometimes be a little difficult to deal with because your opponent might have to be like, I have to throw a couple of things into this thing because it has the 2 toughness, or the 1 damage that it's going to deal back to me, on my X and 1 character is going to take it out, so I have to wait till I trade favorably into it because this card's going to replace itself. So there's a couple of awkward scenarios depending on the matchups that you're in, where this card is actually a decent body with its 1 strength and 2 toughness. But the thing that you really care about, obviously, is the fact that when it's banished, you draw a card. So you quest for 1, it gets banished, it replaces itself, that's fine. If it quests for more than that, even better, you just generate additional advantage. No different than what it did in Rise of the Floodborn and onwards, but good to see it coming back into the game, and I think it probably stays in Amethyst Steel aggro. The Snake, nothing to say here, continues to be one of the best Amethyst cards in the game, and again, you need this in order to protect your Maleficent 1-drop. The card that you really need to discuss though is the Calhoun Marine Sergeant. This is a 2-cost uninkable, 3 strength, 2 willpower character with the resist 1 ability. This card is insane, and it will definitely be one of the money rares out of set 6 for sure. Hopefully I'll be able to pick up a foil playset before the price spikes. This is pre-sale prices, so definitely won't be there, I hope. Regardless, though, it also has the Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood ability, level up. It's called something different on Champion of Sherwood, obviously, but during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, gain 2 lore. It quests for 1 and is a rare. Why is this relevant? Well, because like I just discussed, when you drop 1-drops and 2-drops like Diablo and like Cusco, your opponent has to deal with them. You can't just let these things continue to quest. They're going to draw the card no matter what, right? You're just going to have to deal with it. Well, when they exert something to challenge into these things, you draw your card, and that character stays exerted most likely on their board. Well, the Calhoun now comes in and says, yeah, go ahead, stay exerted. I'll just challenge you. Likely survive because I have resist 1, so you'll likely, again, your character's going to need 3 strength or more in order to take me out, and if I do survive, that means I'll ready up next turn probably and be able to take out yet another threat and gain 4 lore in the process while I'm clearing out my opponent's board, reducing their ability to deal with my aggro threats. So this card does a lot for aggro. It does a lot for steel decks in general, I think, but more in particularly aggro. Where it's able to help you stabilize, it's generating you lore in the process, it has resist, it's a threat, it has the ability to quest, so it doesn't have like reckless or anything, and it only costs 2. Yes, it's uninkable, but that doesn't really matter because I don't think you'll ever really want to ink this card because of how much presence it has on a board, especially in an aggro deck where you're trying to protect your threats. So when your opponent is playing into this, right, they're like, okay, I can't really challenge because the Calhoun's going to take me out, but I have to deal with their board state. So like it presents them with an interesting dilemma. This card also can't be like Storm Rage or anything because it has the resist 1, so that's also nice. And then of course, because you're playing the Mim cards, you're able to bounce this back to hand and replay it to take all that 1 point of damage before she's going to get KO'd or anything like that. So a lot of pluses with this card in this deck, and it really does a lot to help solve some of the problems that aggro decks are facing, and that's why in this variation of a steel aggro deck, I think she is definitely a welcomed addition. The docks I've reduced by 1 because again, having like multiple docks in hand just feels really bad. You definitely want to see this at some point, right, when you've dumped your hand, obviously, and only playing 11 uninkables in this version of the deck, you're very likely able to dump out your whole hand very quickly and then play this card and quickly refill it. Again, another option to bounce with the Mim cards if you need to in order to continue to draw. But all in all, Doc is Doc, right? We've seen what he can do in previous or in the previous format, and he'll continue to be played in this deck. And then no surprise, 4 copies of Mr. SME continues to be, in my opinion, the best 2-drop in the game. Well, I don't know, Calhoun. Well, I think Mr. SME is more adaptable, but Calhoun is definitely going to, in certain applications, be better, I think. But yeah, a 2-cost, inkable, 3/3 body that quests for 2, right? When he has the 2 damage on him, maybe you use him to take out an opposing threat. Maybe you bounce him back to hand. Or you just quest with him and get a total of 6 lore in the process and let him get banished during the end of the turn. Like, continues to be an insanely powerful card. As we move on, Madam M. Fox, similar to Snake, nothing to really say here. If you've been around on my channel since set 2 or before, ever since this card came out, I said this is like the most broken card in the game, probably one of the best cards, if not the best card in the game at the time, and it continues to be one of the best, if not continues to be the best Amethyst card in the game. Every Amethyst build you see, you need you need Mim Fox, right? Like it's way too good. And in this aggro deck, not only does it serve as protection because you're able to bounce back some of your exerted threats that are vulnerable, it has rush, it's an overstated card, 3 cost, it's inkable, it has 4 strength, right? It can quest if needed as well, but it's going to be taking out an opposing threat. Like the card is just, go over it every time. It's just it's just an insane card. Now, Crab is an interesting card to put into an aggro deck, but I do think it's worth putting in. It's a 3-cost inkable 3/3 body. So at worst, it's just an even stat line. The ability to give Challenger +3 can really help you clear out a big threat to your board. Like I was talking about, like you can give +3 Challenger to Calhoun, make her a 6/2 body with resist +1, or the Mickey Mouse, like I was saying, and that can really help clear out some big threats. I think in one of the matches that I watched, somebody played the Crab boosted up their Calhoun, and then was able to take out a Maui that only had 1 damage on it with it, gained 2 lore in the process. Yes, they lost their character, but they cleared out a Maui, which would have continued to wipe out their board, and they were able to win that against a Ruby Sapphire player that ended up going to like 8 or 9 ink, I think it was, right? Because this Ruby Sapphire deck got like the brawls off, they got to be prepared off, like, but the Amethyst Steel deck was able to continue to keep up the gas. They continued to draw cards, they continued to poke with the lore, and they were able to clutch it out. So that's what I mean when I'm saying like this deck is a little bit more resilient. And yeah, Merlin Crab just offers you that flexibility. At worst, it's ink, right? But having this as kind of an ace in the pocket to clear out a big threat is really, really nice. I don't think you necessarily need more than 2, but if you want to see it more often, you can definitely play more copies. The White Rose, I think you can cut a few copies of this if you really want to, because you're not really focused on using a card like this to end the game. But, you know, right now I am playing 4 of it. It is a 3 cost, again, 3/3 bodies. That is inkable, similar to Crab. When you play this character, you gain a lore, so even if it gets outed before you can quest with it, it's already generated you a lore, which is nice. And then it can also quest for 1. So just, again, a lot of flexibility with a card like this. You can ink it, you can play it. It's a solid body, doesn't get brawled. It can quest, likely get you 2 lore over time. And so for that reason, I've opted to play cards like this over cards like Gathering Knowledge, which again, you can argue is a mistake. You could probably put in the Gathering Knowledge and it'd be just fine as well. But then you're also susceptible to, like, these are cards that are uninkable. They don't present me with a character on board that I can potentially challenge with if I need to. And this card likely gets you the 2 lore just over the course of 2 turns instead of 1 turn, while giving you the ability to be inkable. So for a new card coming out in this set, I do think that this card is warrants at least looking at whether or not you want to include it over some of the uninkable options that were played in the past. And you can see the difference between like a deck like this, Amethyst Steel, being able to play much less uninkable cards compared to a deck like Amber Amethyst, which plays almost 20 uninkables, right? So there's that to consider as well. You also have the ability and access to Pete, right? Because your deck is not as aggressive as other aggro decks, you do need checks and balances to potential board wipes. So playing this, if the game does get to the point where your opponent can cast something like a Be Prepared, I mean, Grab Your Sword doesn't really play too much anymore, but you know, you don't want to get Storm Raged or something like that, or Double Sung with Ursula. Like, Pete comes in, locks up the actions for the turn, right? They can't brawl, they can't do all these other things, and then your board is likely going to survive to quest another turn, and that might be enough to get you the game win. So 3 Petes, because again, not a card that you necessarily always need to play. And just like Crab, just like the White Rose, 3 cost inkable, 3/3 body. So just solid bodies overall. And then of course, moving into the final couple of cards on the character side, we get to the 4 ink slot. We're playing 4 goats, no surprise there. Another candidate obviously to be bounced with the Mim cards to generate that lore cycle. And then we have our another new card in Yzma, Conniving Chemist. This is a 4 cost inkable, 3 strength, 3 willpower body that quests for 2. So you have the option to quest with it, or you have the ability to feel the power. If you are able to empty your hand, which we already know Amethyst Steel wants to do because of the dock, but now the Yzma complements that, because you know, you empty your hand, you play dock, you draw 2. If you draw a Yzma, right, you play it next turn, you empty your hand again. If Yzma survives, you exert it, you draw 3 cards, right? Very, very powerful effect. If you get this effect off in an aggro with your deck as an aggro deck, you likely win the game, because by the time you get to the point where you can play the 4 ink card, you have 4 ink at least, right, if not 5 or 6, and the 3 cards that you draw, you're just dumping them all on the board. And that's why a card like this works well in aggro. So you can even argue to put this in Amber Amethyst for sure. But again, being a character, it is a little susceptible, and if people start to see this in the meta, you know, let's say Ruby Sapphire, they'll like, I'll save my, they'll be like, I save my Ice Block and Brawl for the Yzma when it comes down. Don't let them get the ability off, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, it's a powerful card for aggro. It's hard to see me justifying this card outside of aggro, so I don't think it should be that much of an expensive card, because again, it is slow, but in an aggro deck, in an Amethyst aggro deck, it's really, really beneficial, because your opponent is likely just not frazzled, but they're trying hard to deal with your early threats, that they're not really developing a board state where, you know, you drop this and they're like, well, I have to deal with this now before it gets its ability off. Whereas you have ideally a bunch of other characters on board that are questing for a lot or putting a lot of pressure on your opponent, and they're like, now I have to make a choice. Do I stop the card draw, or do I stop the lore gain, right, from the opposing characters? So, you know, that kind of decision making is very important, and if you get this ability off, like you said, you're in a really good spot. So that does it for the characters, 57 of them. And then for the aggro mirrors, we're opted to throw in Befuddle. Also just for, general protection against any deck. Like I said, Maleficent, Befuddle their character, then your Maleficent can stay exerted, quest again, gets you 4 lore without worrying about being outed. Yes, you lose some tempo, or not tempo, sorry, you lose some card advantage with the Befuddle. Your opponent is the one that loses tempo, but you're an aggro deck. You don't really care about that. And given that you can play cards like Yzma and generate an insane amount of advantage, especially for an aggro deck, you don't necessarily care about losing some of that card advantage if you set things up the right way. So that's how I think an Amethyst Steel Hyper Aggro could be built. Again, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Would you change anything? Would you include actions to help stabilize board states a little bit more? Would you still focus on just straight up characters? And let me know if you want to see some gameplay for this, because when I finally am able to arrange another session with my friend for tabletop, there's a number of decks that I want to test, and this might be one of them. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.